May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Good morning, St. James, on this beautiful Sunday. The fourth Sunday of Easter is always known as Good Shepherd Sunday. And I have to confess right away that Good Shepherd Sunday is not one of my favorite Sundays to preach on. I love participating in it and I love hearing others, but because it comes up, I find myself, I'm like, oh, I've said this before. So I have a little comfort knowing that I'm not at my regular church, but I'm like, oh no, not that again. So hopefully, bear with me. All four passages this morning kind of convey the message that life can be challenging at times, and we all, at some point, need a little help. We need a little grace beyond ourselves. And we need a shepherd who's willing to lay down their time, their life, their resources to help us out. The Good Shepherd lays down his life or her life for the flock. The reading from Acts of the Apostles kind of convey the message that we are to reach out for the poor, especially. They could be like the sheep that are scattered. And it's up to us to help bring all of us back in, no matter what our status is. And the word says that divine power and presence becomes known and felt and real when we do that. We're restored physically, spiritually, and freed so we can enjoy the abundant life. During the season of Easter, our first reading is usually from the Acts of the Apostles, and I love that we get a chance to go through Acts. But I also wish we could have read from Ezekiel this morning, Ezekiel's Good Shepherd passage. It's a little more uncomfortable. Acts makes us a real connection between us caring for the poor and experiencing the Good Shepherd. Ezekiel 34 has some tough words for the so-called shepherds to tend to the flock. Ezekiel says, you shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves alone. Shouldn't you be feeding the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fatlings, but you do not feed and care for the sheep. You have not strengthened the weak. You have not healed the sick. You have not bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strayed. You have not sought the lost. But with force and harshness, you have ruled them. So they scatter because there is no shepherd. And scattered became prey for all the other wild beasts and animals. Whoa. We have our work cut out for us. And then there's the Gospel of John, chapter 10. And really we need all of verses 1 through 10 and today's selection, 11 through 18, to get a sense of this Good Shepherd. Just before our passage begins today, Jesus says, I am the gate, or I am the door. I am the way to God. And I love the Gospel of John. Jesus has all these I am statements. I am the bread. I am the life. I am the vine. I am. Today he says, I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. How many of us long for an abundant life? And that's not to be confused with a life filled with more things, more clutter, more stuff, but a life full of life. A life running over. This doesn't even mean a longer life or more living, but an abundant one. It's so easy to be fooled into thinking that this is directly related to money, and this is a kind of life that we could buy. And I fall into that trap. And I don't mean to downplay having money or resources at all. That can indeed improve our quality of life. But I think this is talking about a little more, and I think we know what it means. We know that the abundant life is priceless. You can't buy it even if you had the cash. It struck me this time around. I read a commentary, and I had never known this before. I read that shepherds were rough. You hear about Easter, there's shepherds in the field. These are men who couldn't find work anywhere else. No one wanted to be a shepherd. I recently read that women could be shepherds because it was a job that men didn't want. So there were women shepherds tending, and this was quite dangerous. Yet Jesus comes along and calls that good. Isn't that wonderful? The first church I worked when I was a priest up in Evanston, Good Shepherd Sunday was a huge deal, real big deal, because they used the catechesis of the Good Shepherd there. And one of the things I liked about that catechesis is that it's based on this scriptural passage. And in fact, the Second Vatican Council used this passage to open up Catholic understanding of Revelation. Because I have more sheep, not of this fold. There are more sheep out there, and it's up to us to expand our circle. As our provost wrote in the newsletter last week, we are all part of one flock, one fold, under one shepherd. I love this image of the Good Shepherd. One of the first gifts I got with ordination was a little statue one of the women in the congregation at St. Thomas made for me. The quintessential Jesus with the lamb thrown over his shoulder and lambs next to his side, and a couple of kids. And everyone is smiling. The lambs are happy, Jesus is happy, the little kids are happy. And maybe that's wonderful and soothing and that we need to see this. But shepherding is far from being everyone is happy, everyone is smiling. Shepherding is rough. There's nothing nice and safe about sitting on a nice, quiet, pastoral hillside, and everything is peaceful and calm. Psalm 23 says, no. In the presence of danger, there are wolves, there's the hired hand, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong. And good doesn't necessarily mean morally right, but Jesus is saying good shepherd is the one who's there through it all. In the midst of the violence, in the midst of danger, in the midst of darkness, Jesus is there with us, ready to find us when we are lost. What does it feel like to be found? What does it mean to be known by name? What does it mean to be scattered and brought into community? That's the job of the Good Shepherd. I always enjoy reading the New York Times, and I know at least once every 3 or 4 years, they're going to have an article in there about shepherding. And they never disappoint. You can get to use that for a sermon on Good Shepherd Sunday. I think the last one I saw was a family in Maine who lived on the coast, a medical doctor and his family, and every year, I think it was in the springtime, they go to a sheep farm, and they tend to the lost, scattered sheep. And they discovered something. Well, they knew something in all their years. The scattered, lost sheep respond to human touch and affection. Even when other sheep disregard them, they're mama sheep. They'll turn their back. Once the human picks them up, nurtures them, feeds them with the bottle, they become reoriented and join the flock. Wow, isn't that powerful? And another New York Times article on shearing sheep said the same thing. They have these contests, who could shear the most sheep in an hour. And the one who wins the contest is the one who holds the sheep more endearing, and the sheep just lay there while they take off the wool. Emotional connection, human touch, intimacy is all about love, isn't it? The pandemic taught us that social isolation and loneliness and staying away from people can really be damaging to our health. I think it was another New York Times article that said that isolation, loneliness, being by yourself all the time can be as damaging to the heart and soul as cigarettes are to the heart and the lungs. Wow. And you add with that all the anxiety of life and the stressors in our lives, that puts us at risk for a whole host of problems. No wonder we need a Good Shepherd Sunday to remind us of what we need to be more alive, to feel more human. The Good Shepherd of the Gospel of John and the Shepherd of Psalm 23 are important reminders to let us know we are all vulnerable at times. We are all in need of intimacy at times, being known, being protected, being cared for. And that comes mostly from knowing God as the Good Shepherd. I believe we need to discern and listen to voices in our lives that love us, especially at times like this. The voices in our lives that have our best interests at heart. My mama used to say, everybody in their life needs to have at least one person that say, you are beautiful, you are fine, you matter. Everybody needs that. Everyone needs to know that loving voice. Recently on the west side, where the other church where I served, we had a forum where they were talking about the young man who was killed with 96 rounds of gunfire. And one of the young ladies, college student, I forget which country, but I know it was an African country. And she said, I just don't understand it. Why is there so much hate in America? And the first response is violence. I just don't understand it. Unfortunately, I think it's a little more global, but I knew what she meant. We know these voices of hatred, of violence, of anxiety, of distress. How much more important in times like these to know the voice of the Good Shepherd, the voice of love, the voice of someone calling you by name. I got you. Someone touching us, someone holding us when we need it. When a friend of mine was dying from cancer right in the midst of the pandemic, she had a schedule where she would have people who to come and hold her. She said, I need this touch. I'm not going to make it without it. I'm like, we all need it. We are to imitate the Good Shepherd and be good shepherds to one another. And one of the things those shepherds found out in their studies of the shepherds in Maine was that when the sheep do not have that, when they're scared, they run, they scatter, they go to the edges, they leave the flock alone. And the Good Shepherd goes after them and brings them back. How many people do we know that leave our flock? They scatter. I don't do church no more, girl. You can't get me back in church. The Good Shepherd says, find a way to get them back. Don't let them scatter. Bring them back to the center. I went to a math and science school, but I have to say, physics was not my subject. However, I did like the notion of centrifugal and centripetal force. I think that speaks to the church. I think centripetal is revolving around in orbit like the sun and bringing to the center. Those who have been scattered on the outside of society, we are to bring them back into the fold to the center. And once they're here and nurtured by our love and presence and the beautiful sounds, the beautiful faces, then we're to use the centrifugal to send them back out into the world. I think that's the role of the Good Shepherd. God is always trying to get our attention, always speaking to us, even now. I would say especially now. And we must learn to listen and learn how to figure out that voice. We need to recognize it and practice listening so we know the sound of that voice. For me, it comes through all the time through children or music. We can't just expect to hear that voice at the last minute when we're in trouble. I think we need to spend time, a lot of time, finding out what that voice is. We know the voice of love. Jesus says, my sheep follow me because they recognize my voice. They don't follow the stranger. They don't know their voice. If Jesus spoke to you today, and I would even change that to when Jesus speaks to you today, how will you know that's him? What are your practices? What are your disciplines to discern that loving voice of the shepherd? When I worked in the elementary school and parents would come and pick up their children, it was always amazing. The mother could just call out their name and they would hear the mother's voice and they would go there. We know the voice of love and vice versa. I knew my mother's and godmother's voice when they said, "Baby, come here." I'm like, okay. And I also knew it when they said, "Christopher Edward Griffin, come here right now." I'm like, that's still the voice of love, but I might be in a little bit of trouble. How do you know the voices of the ones who love you? How do you know the voice of the shepherd? The voice of love leads you to safety, leads you to nourishment, leads you to feeling loved. How do we prepare for that? Fortunately, we're part of a long Christian tradition that gives us practices. We have many of them here at St. James. Morning prayer, noon Eucharist, Compline, choir, all of this you hear. We have what we need to do this. We need it because there's so many distractions. 24/7, we're hearing something else that's quite disturbing. Maybe in our quiet time, we could shut some of that out and get rid of some of the clutter and tune into the voice of God. I know it's there. The Word teaches us what Christ sounds like and what He would say. The community of believers, when we're gathered together, you can hear the voice of God. It was interesting this morning at 8 o'clock, and we read from the prayers of the people, and this prayer, the leader, the intercessor misread, "comfort and heal those," and she said, "confront and heal." I said, that wasn't a slip, that was the Spirit. We are to confront and heal, confront those forces that threaten our very safety and our health. This is about our health, our emotional, physical, spiritual health. The rulers of the day are not always in tune to that, and we're to help guide them, and vice versa. I need to practice listening more. I know the voice of Jesus. I've heard Him before. When Jesus speaks, He's always going to point you to a place of abundant life, eternal life. His voice always calls us to love, to embrace and treasure this life that we have, no matter how long or how short it is. Jesus warns us about the wolves out there that threatens us, the hired hands who doesn't care about you as much as He does. He warns us that there are so many forces that mislead, frighten, harm, which is why we need Him. He will lead us to green pastures and safety. The voice of Easter, if Jesus taught us nothing else with His crucifixion, He has taught us, even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of darkness, even in the midst of trial and all of that, they do not have the last word in your life. Love does. Amen.